all, welcome back to my channel. I hope you guys are doing well. It's been a while since I had a topic, but I thought, I should share this because it's so recent. But if you're new to my channel, welcome to my channel, and I hope you will be able to subscribe, and don't forget to like and share this video. And if you've been with me, I appreciate your support always. I hope you guys are doing well. So as you saw, in my previous video, I was at the lake, and I met this woman who was so nice, and so she reminded me so much of a South African. She's African American. She's a student, I believe, and she works for an environmental agency here. Or she's interning for it. So she was passing around flyers, and we just struck a conversation because she had my accent or our accents, and she wanted to know more about us. Our accents are always a conversation starter, which, by the way, there's another topic I would like to cover about those accents, but let's stay with this topic. So she said something that it's not that I have not heard it before, but it was the first time that I've actually heard it being said by an African American to me directly. I've read about it on the internet, and I've heard a lot of, conversations about it. Really more from, people who are just, throwing their opinions around. And so when, so she said to me, you know what? African immigrants are so smart compared to African Americans, and they're so well educated. I've seen that, I've traveled around the world. So I jumped in because I've heard this conversation before. But I want to give you, before I tell you what I said to her, I want to give you a background, of my own evolution. So when I first came to America, before I even came to America, I used to watch CNN, which was more hard news outside of America. There's a version of CNN in general that the world sees, and then there was a version of CNN that Americans see. And so I used to watch news shows a lot because I didn't know what to watch. And so the opinions were always out there about drumming the fact that African Americans are underperforming, and that African immigrants, when they come to America, they perform as good as white people, for instance, in terms of test scores and everything. And so I think it was from that generalization that a lot of, people's opinions were formed. And so it became like a, kind of like a legend that, Africans, when they come over here, they perform so much better, and therefore they are so smart. And so when people drum that, you kind of internalize that, and you accept it, and you don't question it, especially for you as an African immigrant, because you're thinking, why would, I don't even think you think of it consciously, but you internalize it in a way that, motivates you, right? Because when people think highly of you, you kind of want to live up to that. The opposite happens when people don't think highly of you. Sometimes you don't care. And so I kind of, internalize that. And so I know some, even to this day, some, some African immigrants believe that, right? And it's understandable, because a lot of times we don't give things deeper thought than, their face value. We just accept them and we run with them. But for me, I love to think about things in general in my own head when I'm just sitting, thinking about what things really mean. So originally, I had internalized that so much because I didn't know better, and I'm going to use those words. And I say that because even when my kids were going to school, I was kind of wary about where they were going, but I also had this thing in the back of my mind that, I went to the so-called bad schools in South Africa, and here I am. So really, does it truly matter, right? And so I wasn't really thinking too hard or scared enough to do something beyond, Kid went to mostly white schools, not by design or by me choosing. It's because she was interested in those schools that she went to, and so we applied for those. Same as Luke. Luke went to predominantly black schools, and it's because he was interested in those schools, and those are the schools he wanted. I remember we had a discussion when it was time for him to go to high school, and I wanted him to go to the same school as Kid because it was more specialized school for science, but he wanted to go to an early college program, and so I kind of had to give in and accept that. And because I know my children are very stubborn. But to come back to the point is, I internalized all of that, and I read it online, and I saw it everywhere. Even the news were always hammering it, right? But what people didn't tell you was that behind the performance, the high performance of immigrants, especially those, because African immigrants were always singled out to basically use them to beat on African Americans, to say that the reason why you're not performing as well is because you just, like lazy bunch of people. But what they don't understand is that a lot of times when people come to a new country as immigrants, they have no choice but to succeed, number one. Number two, they were picked in their own countries because they were already excelling anyway, okay? Or they had the skills that, let's say, America needed, and therefore they were able to come to America. So you basically took the cream of the crop from those countries and you moved it here, and then you took that small sample, because you left millions, over 1 billion people in Africa. You left almost 1 billion people over there, and a lot of people are suffering over there. And then you take that little sample and you use it to compare with the general population. So basically, you are comparing oranges to apples, right? So that is the point I wanted to make, is that it is totally unfair and unwise to take the sample of immigrants who come here desperate and having no choice but to succeed, and compare it with native born African Americans who don't have the same pressures. Okay, the only pressure we have ultimately is to survive, and if you're surviving, anything you do beyond that is really up to you, right? So the point I'm trying to make again is that it is unfair. And not only is this comparison made, when it comes to immigrants, people will talk about Asians, people will talk about, like Hispanics who come to America and how hard they work. We have no choice but to work hard, because a lot of us are tied to employers. So if we don't do well, you're more likely to either lose your job and go back to your own country. And another thing is, a lot of us, I know in our situation, we came here because my husband got a job because he had the right skills. So we then pass that to our children to say, okay, the reason why I got to this country is because we had education. So education is the most important thing to our family because it's what brought us here. So then you pass that to your children. Your children are more likely to do well just because of that. Like they understand how valuable education has been to, let's say, to their own families. So they continue on that path, basically. So again, there are local politics that are behind like this generalization that is negative towards African American versus, African immigrants. And for me as an immigrant, it's so easy to not want to cede my own position of being put in a pedestal in favor of what is a fair assessment of what's really going on. I don't dispute that, African Americans, by and large, compared to even people like me who really literally came from nothing. I didn't even have a house until I was 14 years old. By house, I mean a proper house. We had a shack, of course. It's not like we slept outside. But I remember even the period where we literally slept in tents for months because the government said, here's land, build whatever you want to build. And so everybody just built a shack, which we lived in, since I was born. And so the point I'm trying to make is that, yes, I don't dispute that America has a lot of opportunities, but immigrants have different pressures that native-born people do not. So to make that comparison is unfair. And not only that, there's a ton of African Americans that are performing exceptionally well since the days of slavery. Someone made a point that I thought was very, very important. I read it online. That person, all credit goes to you. That person said African Americans are they stand on the shoulders of people who fought slavery, and in a sense allowed people like me to have the opportunity to come to this country. Because if it was not for African Americans fighting the good fight and creating conditions that would allow for people like me to come here, I wouldn't be here today. So to forget that is so easy when everything is what it is because of the fight that they have to put up. So there is no competition. There is no competition between us as immigrants. All we want to do is survive. The same way, African Americans, if they were to move to a different country, that would be their focus. And so we have to understand that. And even when it comes to things like, the little squabbles that sometimes you see, which I have not personally experienced, but I've seen like people feeling like, there's a competition between Africans and African Americans or Native African Americans versus, people like me who are African American by naturalization. There's no competition, and we're all trying to survive. So there's no room for xenophobia, but I totally understand if, let's say, an African American would feel like they are being slighted. And I, as an immigrant, am preferred over them. I would understand how a person would feel some sort of way. This does not rise to the level of xenophobia in my view. It's just saying, this is my home, I should be preferred. Think about it. If your parents went and preferred their neighbor's child, you wouldn't feel good about it, right? So you feel a little bit of, being slighted. And I know this topic, what I'm talking about right now, doesn't seem like related to what I was talking about. It's totally related, and I just want to show you the connection, between, or really connecting the dot between immigrants coming here, performing well, and eventually being the ones that are preferred over native African Americans. Then Native African American feeling a little bit slighted. Not that, again, I know personally anyone who feels that way, but I've read comments and everything. So it's never been, for me, it's never been about that. And by the way, I can totally understand, as I said, why they would feel that way, because that's how South Africans feel. And people misconstrue that as xenophobia when it's nothing more than like a really like feeling slighted, right? And xenophobia is when you literally don't want immigrants into your country, not because you don't have opportunity, but you just don't want them because they are foreigners. In many cases, when what I call the human displacement for economic reasons happens, it's not always xenophobia. It's just saying, wait a minute, I can do the same job. Why am I being slighted and someone else who's from a foreign country being preferred? So I understand that. And I know even the smartest people misconstrue this as xenophobia. It's different. As I said, there are people who have opportunities but would hate on someone just because they're foreigner. And then there are people who could do the same job and want the same opportunity, and they are willing to work hard for that opportunity, but they don't get it because they are native. And the reason why a lot of times that's done, by the way, is because people in positions of power in companies prefer people who they don't have to accommodate their feelings. They know that they're just here to work. When you are a native born, you have different expectations, different feelings, different baggages that you bring, and rather than companies accommodate that, they rather go with someone else, because then they don't have to deal with that. They can just focus on the business. But that's not a justification for what they do, because it really does displace human beings over time and literally uproots them and make them rootless, basically. Is that a word? I don't know. But it basically takes away their ability to feel connected to the land and to the issues, and takes that away because people are forced to move away. Again, I'm not against people being hired like immigrants. For instance, here in America, there's a shortage of skills right now because they say the economy is booming right now. You can see it literally when you go to stores. Sometimes it's very difficult to find help. Part of it is companies just being cheap. Part of it is, reliance on machinery and technology. But either way, sometimes it's very difficult to find help. And so you see a lot of, human displacement. And sorry, I lost my train of thought. So the point I was making is that sometimes immigration is necessary, and sometimes people can choose to immigrate because we have a right and freedom to live wherever we want to live in the world, wherever makes us comfortable. And I dream really of the day when people can move, not because they're forced to move from their homelands, but they really choose to go somewhere, right? And go live somewhere because they prefer the area or whatever, they are paid more, whatever, for whatever reason. They choose to, not because they're forced to, but they are making that choice. So a lot of times, especially people in low, who have what is considered lower skill levels, they tend to be forced to move from their own countries. Not because there are no jobs available. As I said, sometimes it's because the foreigners are preferred. So to summarize, so I don't keep on going and losing my train of thought, was to say the generalizations that we hear that are hammered in our heads daily about who's performing well and who's not performing well really do not take into consideration the fact that in those countries those people came from, there are lots of people who are not performing as well. And that the people who are coming into the new countries performing well, a lot of times is because they have pressures and reasons to perform well. Most likely, if they were in their own countries, they wouldn't be working as hard, or they wouldn't be prepared even if they worked as hard. So there's that. And that there's a difference between xenophobia and just feeling slighted because of what I call human displacement for economic reasons. And so I just wanted to share that. I hope I made sense, and I hope that you enjoyed the video, and I hope that you will share it if you did find. And also I would like really to start a real discussion about this, and I would love to know what you have to say about this topic. And I know I touched on many topics, but they're all related and they all feed into the same topic basically, and a larger topic, which is preference of immigrants over native people. So tell me what you think, and I hope you have a wonderful day. And I'm going to move my, look at that, that's my light right there behind me. And I'm going to have to find a new place to sit, because with the light behind in front of me and behind me, it's kind of makes it all, anyway. Bye, love you all.